In the heart of a bustling metropolis, cocooned within towering glass and steel, lay the corporate offices of Dalton and Finch. The year was 1982, an era marked by the pulsating rhythms of synthesizers and the unmistakable aura of a world embracing the technological marvels of the future. Within this labyrinth of cubicles and fluorescent lights, where the clack of typewriters and the murmur of conversations blended into a symphony of corporate life, Emily Thorne found her sanctuary. Emily, with her chestnut hair often tied back in a neat bun, was the epitome of diligence. Each morning, as the sun cast its first rays upon the city, she would be found at her desk, immersed in piles of paperwork, her eyes reflecting a determination that was born from a past that had taught her to rely on no one but herself. She moved through the office with a grace that belied the strength within her, a strength carved from the trials of a youth spent in the shadows of adversity. Her presence in the office was like a quiet storm, subtle yet undeniable. Emily had learned early in life that independence was not just a choice, but a necessity. The challenges she faced growing up had molded her into a woman who valued self-reliance above all. She was cautious, yes, but her caution was a shield, forged in the fires of experiences that whispered of the world's unpredictability. As the hands of the clock marched forward, marking the passage of another day, a figure lurked in the periphery of Emily's world. Michael, a coworker known as much for his unsettling demeanor as for his connection to the company's upper echelons. His presence in the office was like a shadow that chilled the air slightly, a contrast to the warmth that Emily brought. Michael, with his hair slicked back and a gaze that seemed to pierce through the mundane, was an enigma wrapped in a riddle. His background was shrouded in whispers that spoke of a troubled past, of tumultuous family dynamics, and of a youth spent under the heavy gaze of expectations and privilege. In the corridors of Dalton and Finch, he was a subject of hushed conversations and sidelong glances, his behavior often bordering on the bizarre. His cubicle, a mere stone's throw from Emily's, was a gallery of the macabre. It was adorned with imagery that could only be described as disturbing, pictures that seemed to capture the darker recesses of the human psyche. Yet, his position as the son of one of the firm's founders placed him beyond the reach of reproach. The images remained, a testament to the unspoken rules that governed the office hierarchy. The office environment at Dalton and Finch was not just a professional space. It was a microcosm of personal dramas and unseen battles. Here, the lines between personal and professional were often blurred, creating an undercurrent of tension that hummed beneath the surface of everyday interactions. For Emily, this environment was both a battlefield and a refuge. She navigated the complexities of office politics with a quiet resilience, her focus unwavering, her ambitions clear. Yet, there was an air of solitude about her, a sense of being perpetually on guard. She had few confidants, preferring the safety of her own company to the uncertainties of office alliances. As days turned to weeks and weeks to months, the subtle dance of avoidance and interaction between Emily and Michael continued. She, with her guarded glances and polite, distant smiles. He, with his lingering stares and unsettling quietude. One particular day, as the office buzzed with the usual cacophony of ringing phones and clicking keyboards, Emily caught Michael watching her from his cubicle. His stare was empty, devoid of the usual human warmth, sending a shiver down her spine. It was in that moment that the undercurrents of unease that had been building within her began to coalesce into a tangible sense of dread. She turned away, her heart pounding a rhythm of alarm, her mind a whirlwind of questions. What lay behind those vacant eyes? What thoughts lurked in the mind of a man who surrounded himself with images of darkness? Emily knew that within the confines of Dalton and Finch, there were secrets that whispered of dangers hidden in plain sight. As the days unfurled like the pages of an unread book, The atmosphere within the walls of Dalton and Finch began to take on a more sinister hue. Emily, ever the observer, started to notice the unsettling shifts in Michael's behavior. It was subtle at first, a prolonged stare that lingered a moment too long, a seemingly accidental brush past her desk, a hushed whisper caught in the flow of office chatter. The first jolt of realization came on an overcast Tuesday morning. Emily, sipping her coffee, overheard Michael in conversation with a colleague. His voice, usually a monotone, took on an unnerving edge as he mentioned Emily's favorite coffee shop, a detail she had never shared with him. Her hand froze mid-air, the warmth of the coffee cup suddenly feeling like a searing reminder of the walls closing in. The unease deepened when Emily began to pay closer attention to the imagery adorning Michael's cubicle. The pictures, which she had initially dismissed as eccentric art, now seemed to whisper dark tales. There were scenes of desolation, faces twisted in expressions of fear, and landscapes that seemed to bleed sorrow. This gallery of nightmares was a window into Michael's psyche, a psyche that was becoming increasingly fixated on her. Whispers about Michael's past began to circulate with more urgency. There were rumors of incidents at his previous workplace, of a temper that flared like a match in a dry forest, of a darkness that clung to him like a second skin. These stories, shared in hushed tones over hurried lunches, painted a portrait of a man teetering on the edge of something unfathomable. The discomfort among her colleagues was palpable. Conversations would cease when Michael walked by, eyes would dart away, evading his gaze. Emily observed this dance of avoidance, feeling the weight of unspoken fears. It was as if Michael cast a long shadow, one that stretched across the office, darkening the space around him. Determined to address the growing concern, Emily approached the Human Resources Department. Her voice was steady as she detailed her observations, the unease in her colleagues, the inappropriate nature of Michael's cubicle decor. But her words seemed to dissolve into the air, meeting a wall of bureaucratic indifference.
Michael is a valued member of the team, and his personal style is just that personal.
The HR representative had said, a rehearsed smile plastered on her face.
We encourage individual expression here at Dalton and Finch.
Emily's attempt to seek intervention was brushed aside with a casualness that left her feeling isolated. The message was clear. Michael's position as the son of a founder placed him beyond the reach of standard protocols. The rules were different for him. The safety and comfort of others were secondary. Frustration simmered within Emily. It was a frustration born not just of fear, but of the injustice that allowed such behavior to go unchecked. She found herself increasingly vigilant, her senses heightened to every glance, every movement that Michael made. The tension in the office escalated as Emily continued to witness Michael's obsessive behavior. He seemed to be everywhere, lingering near her desk, appearing in the corridors she walked, his eyes always seeking her out. His obsession was like a vine, slowly entwining itself around her daily life, squeezing tighter with each passing day. One particularly chilling incident occurred late one evening, as the office was cloaked in the stillness of after hours. Emily had stayed late to finish a report, the glow of her desk lamp a solitary beacon in the sea of darkness. As she gathered her things to leave, she felt a presence behind her. Turning around, her heart skipped a beat. It was Michael, standing just outside her cubicle, his eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her blood run cold.
Working late, Emily?
His voice was soft, almost a whisper, but it echoed in the silence like a gunshot. Emily managed a terse reply, her body tensed for flight. But Michael just stood there, watching her, before finally melting away into the shadows of the office. That night, as Emily walked to her car, the darkness felt heavier, the silence more oppressive. She could feel Michael's gaze on her back, a ghostly touch that followed her all the way home. The incident left Emily shaken, her sense of safety shattered. She lay awake that night, the moon casting shadows across her bedroom, and pondered her next move. The walls of Dalton and Finch once a place of ambition and growth, now felt like a trap, closing in on her with each passing day. The decision to leave Dalton and Finch was not one that Emily made lightly. It came from a place deep within her, where unease had grown roots and spread its tendrils through every aspect of her life. The once familiar corridors of the office had become a labyrinth of anxiety, each turn filled with the possibility of encountering Michael. His presence, once merely unsettling, had morphed into a tangible threat that loomed over her daily existence. Emily's nights were restless, her dreams haunted by shadowy figures and whispered threats. Her waking hours were no better, filled with a constant vigilance that drained her spirit. The vibrant, ambitious woman who had walked into Dalton and Finch with aspirations and dreams now found herself looking over her shoulder, jumping at shadows. The decision to leave was a battle between her desire for safety and her ambition. Her career at Dalton and Finch had been hard-earned, a testament to her resilience and talent. But what value did success hold if her peace of mind was the price? Her inner turmoil was a storm of conflicting emotions, fear, anger, frustration, and a deep sense of injustice. The morning of her last day dawned like any other, yet for Emily, it felt like the end of an era. As she walked through the office, her steps were tinged with a bittersweet finality. She exchanged farewells with colleagues, their words of regret and confusion echoing her own mixed feelings. Throughout the day, Emily felt Michael's gaze on her. It was as if he sensed the change, the impending departure of his obsession. His stares were more intense, his proximity more deliberate. Emily's heart raced with a mixture of fear and relief that she was leaving this behind, fear of what Michael might do in these final hours. As the day drew to a close, Emily packed up her personal belongings, her movements mechanical. Her thoughts were a whirlwind, a mix of anticipation for a future free from this torment and apprehension about the unknown path ahead. Just as she was about to leave, Michael approached her. His voice was eerily calm as he offered her a ride home.
It's your last day, Emily. I know you take the bus home, so let me give you a lift as a farewell gesture,
he said, his eyes locked on hers. The offer caught Emily off guard, sending a chill down her spine. Every instinct screamed at her to decline, to put as much distance between herself and Michael as possible. But a part of her wavered, caught in the age-old trap of politeness and the fear of offending. She was torn, her intuition battling against the ingrained need to be courteous, to not cause a scene. The office around them was emptying, the bustle of departure creating a sense of urgency. Emily weighed her options, her mind racing. Accepting the ride felt like walking into the lion's den, yet outright refusal might provoke an unwanted reaction from Michael. Her decision, made in the span of a heartbeat, was a compromise guided by fear and caution.
I have a few things to wrap up, maybe later,
she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil within. Michael nodded, a faint smile playing on his lips, and walked away. As Emily watched him go, a sense of dread settled in her stomach. She knew she had merely postponed the inevitable. The office was now almost deserted, the evening shadows creeping in. The quiet was oppressive, the lingering sense of Michael's presence like a dark cloud over her final moments at Dalton and Finch. The sun had begun its descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple as Emily finally stepped out of the office building. The air outside was crisp, a stark contrast to the stifling atmosphere she had left behind. She paused, taking a deep breath, trying to shake off the unease that clung to her like a second skin. As she made her way to the parking lot and headed towards the street, a voice called out from behind.
Leaving so soon, Emily?
It was Michael, his tone casual, yet underlined with something that made her heart skip a beat. Reluctantly, she stopped, turning to face him.
I thought you might still want that ride,
Michael said, gesturing towards his car, with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. The parking lot was nearly empty, the fading light casting long shadows. Every instinct screamed at Emily to decline, but the fear of what refusing might provoke in Michael held her tongue. With a nod that betrayed none of her apprehension, she followed him to his car, her steps measured, her mind racing. As they drove, the city lights blurred past, creating a surreal backdrop to the unfolding drama within the car. Michael talked, his voice a steady stream of words that filled the space between them. He spoke of the office, of the people they knew, but as the conversation progressed, it took a darker turn. He began to talk about justice and retribution, about how people needed to be taught lessons. His words were laced with anger, a bitterness that seemed to seep from his very core. Emily listened, her body tensed, her mind alert for any sign of danger. But it was when Michael spoke of her personal life that Emily's fear turned to terror. He mentioned her favorite weekend getaway spot, her love for jazz music, details she had never shared with him. The realization that he had been observing her, learning about her without her knowledge, was a violation that left her feeling exposed and vulnerable. Michael's driving became more erratic, his movements sharp and unpredictable. His words were now a weapon, each sentence a subtle thrust, designed to unnerve, to manipulate. He spoke of how he understood her, how no one else saw her the way he did. It was a twisted confession of obsession, wrapped in the guise of empathy and understanding. Emily's mind raced, searching for a way out of this increasingly dangerous situation. She thought of jumping out of the car, of screaming for help, but the speed at which they were moving made those options seem like a leap into even greater peril. As they neared her neighborhood, Emily's sense of panic grew. She didn't want Michael to know where she lived, to have that final piece of her privacy invaded. But as she began to give him directions, he veered off course, driving in the opposite direction.
Where are you going?
Emily's voice was sharp, laced with fear.
I thought we could take the scenic route, spend a little more time together.
Michael replied, his voice eerily calm. Emily's heart pounded in her chest, the sound deafening in her ears. She knew she had to act, to regain control of the situation before it spiraled further into darkness. The car continued to slice through the city, the streets becoming less familiar as Michael drove further away from Emily's intended destination. The buildings thinned out, giving way to open spaces that hinted at the city's edge. Emily's mind raced, each scenario more terrifying than the last. She needed to regain control, to steer the situation away from whatever dark end Michael had in mind. In a moment of desperate inspiration, Emily suggested they stop at Greenfield Park.
It's such a beautiful evening,
she said, her voice strained with feigned calm.
Why don't we enjoy the sunset?
Michael glanced at her, a flicker of surprise in his eyes, before a slow, unsettling smile crept across his face.
An excellent idea, Emily,
he replied, and turned the car towards the park. Greenfield Park was a stark contrast to the chaotic world Emily had left behind. As they walked along its winding paths, the park was serene, a tranquil oasis that stood in defiance of the turmoil churning inside Emily. The gentle rustle of leaves and the distant chatter of birds provided a surreal soundtrack to the escalating tension between them. But the beauty of the park did nothing to ease Emily's growing sense of dread. Michael's behavior, erratic in the confines of the car, became increasingly unhinged in the open space of the park. He spoke in riddles, his words a tangled web of innuendos and veiled threats. He rambled about fate and destiny, about how their paths were meant to cross. Emily walked beside him, her senses heightened, acutely aware of every movement, every shift in his tone. She noticed the way his eyes darted around, taking in their surroundings, as if calculating, planning. His hands, which had been relaxed at his sides, now clenched and unclenched sporadically, betraying an inner turmoil. As the darkness began to settle in, the park transformed. The shadows grew longer, the light dimmer, and the once welcoming paths turned into looming corridors of uncertainty. The tranquility of the park became a facade, masking the danger that lurked within its embrace. Michael's conversation turned darker still, his words laced with bitterness and resentment. He spoke of people who had wronged him, of how they deserved to be punished. His voice, once smooth, was now jagged, cutting through the peaceful ambience of the park. Emily's heart pounded in her chest, each beat a loud drum echoing her fear. She realized she was alone with a man who was unraveling before her eyes, his sanity slipping away like sand through fingers. She needed to escape, to find a way back to safety, but every step took her deeper into the heart of the park, further from help. Underneath the canopy of stars, the park's beauty transformed into a haunting landscape, its shadows deepening around Emily and Michael. With a voice trembling but resolute, Emily insisted that it was time to go home. Her words pierced the eerie calm of the night, catalyzing a change in Michael that was both sudden and terrifying. Michael's demeanor shifted abruptly, his mask of sanity slipping away to reveal the chaos beneath. He protested vehemently, his voice a crescendo of desperation and anger.
"You can't leave now, Emily. This is our time,"
he exclaimed, his hands gesturing wildly, a stark silhouette against the dim light. The intensity of his reaction was a cold splash of reality for Emily. She realized with chilling clarity that Michael was not going to let her leave easily. Her mind raced, calculating the risk of every possible action. Amidst the turmoil, a plan began to form, a dangerous but necessary gamble. With a calmness that belied her inner turmoil, Emily agreed to return to the car, her voice steady.
All right, Michael, let's go back,
she said, masking her fear with a feigned sense of resignation. As they walked back to the car, the night seemed to close in around them, the darkness a tangible force that mirrored the mounting tension. Emily's senses were hyper-alert, every sound, every shadow amplifying her fear. Yet, she moved with deliberate calmness, her steps measured, her mind focused on the task at hand. Inside the car, the atmosphere was thick with unspoken threats. Michael drove in silence, his grip on the steering wheel tight, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. Emily sat beside him, her body rigid, her mind racing through scenarios of escape. The journey was a blur of streetlights and shadows, the city passing by in a haze of fear and anticipation. Emily's plan was a tightrope walk over an abyss of uncertainty, but it was a risk she had to take. She waited for the right moment, the right location, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm of hope and dread. Finally, as they approached a more populated area, Emily saw her chance. With a sudden movement, she reached for the door handle, her actions fueled by a surge of adrenaline.
Stop the car, Michael. I need to get out here,
she demanded, her voice a mix of fear and determination. Michael's reaction was immediate and explosive. He slammed on the brakes, the car screeching to a halt, the sound tearing through the night. He turned towards her, his face contorted with anger and disbelief.
"You're not going anywhere, Emily,"
he hissed, his voice a venomous whisper. The scene that unfolded was one of heightened drama and palpable danger. Emily, trapped in the car with a man whose sanity was hanging by a thread, knew that her next move could mean the difference between safety and peril. The tension inside the car was a tangible entity, a thick cloud of fear and desperation. Emily's hand, gripping the door handle, trembled with the weight of her decision. Outside, the city's pulse seemed to quicken, its rhythm echoing her racing heart. Michael's eyes, wide with fury and disbelief, bore into her, but Emily knew she had only one chance. With a deep breath that felt like her first in hours, Emily acted. In one swift, decisive motion, she pushed the door open and hurled herself out of the moving car. The world spun wildly, a chaotic blur of lights and sounds as she hit the pavement, her body rolling with the momentum of the car's speed. Pain exploded through Emily in a bright, searing wave. She felt the rough scrape of asphalt against her skin, the sharp jolt of impact reverberating through her bones. For a moment, time seemed to slow, her senses overwhelmed by the cacophony of the escape. As the car screeched to a stop further down the street, Emily lay dazed on the roadside, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Her mind, though clouded with pain, was acutely aware of her vulnerability, of the looming threat of Michael returning. But then, amidst the haze of pain and fear, she heard voices. Concerned faces appeared above her, the residents of the neighborhood drawn by the commotion. Among them was a young man, her neighbor from a few doors down, his expression a mix of worry and determination.
"Emily, are you okay? We need to get you to safety,"
he said, his voice cutting through the fog of Emily's shock. With his help, Emily managed to stand, her body protesting with a chorus of aches and pains. She glanced back at the car, half expecting to see Michael charging towards her, but he was nowhere to be seen. The car left 2 black stripes of burnt rubber in the middle of the street. The mark stood as a silent witness to her escape. The young neighbor, with a protective arm around Emily, guided her away from the scene. The other residents murmured words of concern and support, their presence a comforting balm to her frayed nerves. In this moment of crisis, the community had come together, a stark contrast to the isolation that enveloped Michael. As they walked, Emily's mind replayed the night's events. Her escape was not just a physical act of fleeing danger, it was a pivotal moment in her personal journey. The pain she felt was more than the bruises and scrapes that adorned her body. It was the culmination of the emotional and psychological ordeal she had endured. Emily was safe in her home now, her neighbor making a call for medical assistance. She sat there, a mix of exhaustion and relief, her shaking body a map of bruises and abrasions. The night's events had left their mark, a physical manifestation of the ordeal she had survived. Months passed since that fateful night, and the world had continued its relentless march forward. For Emily, however, time seemed to move differently, each day a reminder of the scars she bore, both visible and hidden. The ordeal with Michael had left her with more than just physical injuries. It had imprinted a deep sense of wariness and an unshakable feeling of being perpetually over her shoulder. The office of Dalton and Finch was now a distant memory, a chapter she had firmly closed, but its spectres continued to haunt her. It was during one such ordinary day, as Emily attempted to weave normalcy back into her life, that the past came crashing back. The news spread rapidly, a dark wave that consumed the city's consciousness. A tragedy had struck Dalton and Finch. A fire, sudden and devastating, had engulfed the office building. The inferno was merciless, claiming lives and leaving behind a landscape of ash and sorrow. As details emerged, a chilling revelation came to light. The fire, it was discovered, was no accident. It was a deliberate act, a final, catastrophic expression of rage and despair. And at the center of this maelstrom was Michael. Investigations revealed a trail of evidence that pointed irrefutably to him. The fire was the culmination of his descent into madness, a twisted retribution against a world he felt had wronged him. His obsession, unchecked and ignored, had morphed into a destructive force that had now claimed innocent lives. The news hit Emily like a physical blow. The memories of that night, of Michael's erratic behavior and dark ramblings, suddenly took on a prophetic quality. She realized with a chilling clarity that the danger she had sensed, the unease she had felt, were the harbingers of this tragedy. But amidst the revelations and the mourning, a disquieting mystery lingered. Michael's fate was unknown. In the aftermath of the fire, his body was not found among the ruins. This uncertainty cast a shadow over the tragedy, a haunting question mark that loomed large in the public consciousness. For Emily, this uncertainty was a dark cloud that hung over her newfound peace. The absence of closure, the possibility that Michael was still out there, somewhere, kept the wounds fresh, a constant reminder of the terror she had experienced. The world around Emily had slowly started to regain its colors, the stark black and white of trauma gradually giving way to the hues of a life moving forward. Yet, the scars she bore were not just skin deep, they were etched into her very being, a constant reminder of the darkness she had encountered. It was on a seemingly ordinary day, with the sun casting a warm glow over the city, that the past intruded once more into her present. Returning from a walk, Emily found a note in her mailbox. It was unmarked, the envelope plain and nondescript. Her name was written in a familiar scrawl that sent a shiver down her spine. With trembling hands, she opened the envelope and unfolded the note. The message was brief, but its words struck her with the force of a physical blow.
I enjoyed our evening at the park. It was memorable, wasn't it?
The handwriting, though slightly altered, was unmistakably Michael's. The note, with its simple, chilling message, brought back a flood of memories and emotions. The park, the sense of dread, the escape, it all rushed back to her in a torrent of fear and confusion. The unspoken implication of the note was clear. Michael was still out there, watching, waiting. Panic gripped Emily as she looked around, half expecting to see Michael lurking in the shadows. But the street was empty, the normalcy of the day standing in stark contrast to the turmoil within her. The note was a sinister reminder that her ordeal was not over, that the shadows of that night still reached out to her from the past.
We hope you have enjoyed this episode of Quantum Dispatches and stay tuned next week for another thrilling adventure. Thank you for listening.